In early August, the air along the southern edge of Cheyenne, Wyoming, stood still like a dry lake. The ground cracked like snakeskin, and the sunlight fell in thin, colorless sheets. Along the long dirt road that cut through abandoned fields, there were no trucks, no voices, only wind, dust, and the faint clang of metal somewhere in the distance from an old barn. Past a rusted gate and a rotting horse stall stood a torn canvas tent, the kind used for camping, now faded and frayed, leaning to one side like time had clawed it bare. Inside, a woman lay curled up. Her name was Angela Givens, 31 years old, paralyzed from the waist down since a household accident at age 8. She hadn't been mentioned much in her family. In fact, she hadn't been mentioned at all since her mother passed. Her father had died 3 years prior, and her 2 older brothers moved out a week after the funeral. No one hit her, no one shouted. They simply stopped speaking, and then left. That was in mid-June. The older brother had said one thing before climbing into his truck. "You know, we're not professional caregivers." She didn't reply. By the end of July, the food they left behind had spoiled. Angela couldn't open the oatmeal tin. The lid was too tight, and her hands too weak. Her water jug had tipped over 2 days ago, and no one had passed by to ask if she needed anything. When the fever crept in from dehydration, her lips cracked and her head throbbed like needles pricking the back of her skull. Angela began to wonder if she might die. Not quickly, but slowly, quietly, and forgotten. Around noon, she heard hoofbeats. A man on horseback passed by, wearing a government insignia on his jacket. He stopped, glanced into the tent, said nothing, then rode away. She wasn't surprised. People had a way of looking through her and pulling their gaze back, like what they saw was too awkward to acknowledge. By the end of that day, as the sun dropped low into a burnt orange horizon, Angela felt her body slipping. Her mind no longer reached for help, nor carried resentment. Only a brittle question remained. Do I even deserve to live? She didn't have an answer. And just when there was nothing left to expect, she heard another horse, slower, heavier, than the creak of wooden wheels crunching over gravel. Unhurried, steady, a figure appeared down the path. Tall, lean, wearing a cloth cap, his clothes dusted with sawdust and oil. He stopped in front of the tent. He said nothing. He asked nothing. He just looked. And in that moment, everything began to change. The man's name was Samuel Rourke, 35 years old, a former Navy carpenter, honorably discharged after a minor spinal injury. He had since built himself a small woodworking shop about 4 miles outside of Cheyenne. No family left, no friends who kept in touch. People in town called him Wood Sam, but no one had ever been inside his home. He never invited them, and they never asked. Every morning, he drove his old mule cart into town, dropped off door handles, stair railings, chair legs, then returned home before noon. That evening, instead of turning down his usual path, Sam took a detour through the southern fields to avoid a flooded dirt road. That's when he saw the sagging tent, and the thin body slumped close to the ground. Sam didn't call out, didn't ask. He stopped his cart, stepped down. His gait was slightly uneven. An old knee fracture gave his steps a rhythm of their own. He walked closer, eyes fixed on the woman lying motionless. The last of the day's sunlight lit her face. Sunburned, tangled hair, lips cracked deep. She was still breathing, but barely. Her eyes were slightly open, not pleading, just waiting. "Are you awake?" he asked, voice deep and steady. She tried to nod. Her facial muscles barely twitched. Sam didn't press her. He didn't ask why, didn't demand an explanation. He didn't reach out or utter a single word of pity. Instead, he walked to the back of his cart, pulled out a canvas bundle, and returned with a half-full jar of stewed beans, a small water bottle, and a folded cotton cloth. He set them beside her, not roughly, but like setting something down on an altar. No words passed between them. Then Sam disappeared behind the tent. Angela couldn't see him, and assumed he had left, like all the others. But then came the sound of wood knocking gently, measured, deliberate. Someone was building something. When he returned, he carried 2 planks, a thick piece of cloth, and a set of leather straps. He built a stretcher, not pretty but solid. He wasn't rushed. Every movement Sam made was deliberate, as if this was something he had thought through already, even though he clearly didn't know who she was. Angela trembled when he lifted her, not out of fear, but from the pain in her back and shoulders. Sam didn't squeeze or fumble. His hands were steady, not rough. "This will hurt a little," he said plainly, then fastened the straps carefully, adjusted her headrest with a piece of wood. Once the stretcher was secured to the mule cart, Sam climbed back into his seat. He didn't look back, just flicked the reins and guided the mule into a steady trot. No one looked up as they passed through the town's main street. A few men smoking outside the hardware store lifted their heads, then looked away. A woman at the general store pulled her curtain closed. No one asked, no one waved. Angela lay silently, tilted in the fading light. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't lying alone in silence. And for the first time in years, someone hadn't turned away. Samuel Rourke's woodworking shop sat at the end of a sunken dirt road, past 2 sparse lines of pine, where the wind always carried the scent of resin, fresh timber, and unsettled sawdust. The house was a single-story structure, its walls made of rough-hewn pine boards nailed by hand, and the tin roof stained dark with rust. The front door sagged on one hinge, but it still opened without protest. Inside, it was cool and still. A long workbench beneath the window, an old cast-iron stove, a rack of tools, and a folding bed pushed against the wall. Sam said nothing as he brought Angela in. He untied the stretcher, lifted her gently with those steady, quiet arms, and placed her onto the bed the way one sets down something fragile. Not because she was weak, but because something in her eyes made him want to get it right. No questions, no probing. No, "Who are you?" No, "What happened to you?" He pulled a blanket from the shelf and draped it over her. He didn't toss it. He laid it down. When it covered her legs, Angela closed her eyes for a second. Not from exhaustion, but because someone had just done something for her without her having to ask. Sam took out the jar of beans from his canvas bag, placed it on the small table beside the bed, added a spoon, then stepped back. Angela tried to reach it. Her fingers fumbled. The spoon clinked off the rim and fell. Sam said nothing. He simply stepped forward, placed the spoon back into her hand, then returned to the workbench and began sawing a thin piece of wood. He didn't look back, but his ears stayed tuned to every breath she took. Angela managed 2 spoonfuls. She stopped, not because she was full, but because her stomach wasn't used to having anything inside it. For the first time in days, what slid down her throat wasn't pain, but food. When she accidentally knocked over the water, Sam walked over, cleaned it without a word. No scolding, no sigh, as if she didn't need to apologize for existing. When night came, he lit the oil lamp. As the soft yellow glow spread across the walls, he retrieved another blanket and gently laid it over her legs, the kind of gesture that said, "You are here, and that matters." No one had done that in nearly a decade. Sam didn't go to bed right away. He continued sanding a wooden plank, slow and steady. Angela lay quietly, eyes open, watching the flicker of the flame. She still didn't trust him, but she wasn't afraid. Something inside her had shifted. Not gratitude, not affection, but something more primal. The feeling of being seen without having to speak. When she closed her eyes, it wasn't from weariness or surrender. It was because for the first time she chose to rest. The next morning, sunlight cut through the dusty glass of the workshop window. Angela opened her eyes in silence. She didn't remember falling asleep. Only the feeling of lying on a surface that wasn't stones or sand, without the dull fever burning at her temples. Everything still hurt. Her shoulders, wrists, spine, but it was the pain of being alive, not of rotting away. She sat up slowly. On the table beside her, the jar of beans from yesterday had been replaced by a bowl of warm cornmeal porridge and a full glass of water. No note, no instructions. And somehow that made it better. Someone had remembered her. Not to prove anything, just because it felt necessary. Samuel sat at the workbench, slightly hunched, working leather with a hole punch. He didn't look up when she stirred, but his gaze tilted just enough to acknowledge her waking. "Does the smell of fire bother you?" he asked. Angela shook her head, her voice scratchy. "No." He nodded once and carried on. He didn't ask if she slept well. Didn't ask what she needed. He simply continued living as if she had always been there. When she finished eating, Angela set the spoon down and looked around. She'd never been in a place so tidy, yet so lived in. Every tool had its place, yet each bore the marks of use. A dulled blade tip, a frayed rag, a wooden ruler nicked along the edge. Sam stood, poured her more water. "Can you hold a sewing needle?" he asked. It wasn't a demand, just an invitation. Angela hesitated. "I think, maybe." Sam nodded and fetched a small wooden box. He pulled out a few leather scraps, a curved needle, and a thick spool of thread. He set them on the table next to her bed. "If you'd like, try stitching the armrest pads for that chair." He motioned toward a half-built wooden chair in the corner. "No rush." Angela picked up a scrap of leather. Her hands were still weak, but steadier than the day before. The first stitch slipped. The thread ran crooked. She said nothing. Sam didn't correct her. He returned to his bench and resumed drilling a chair leg. The room filled only with soft sounds. Light hammering, cloth shifting, her short breaths whenever she strained. By midday, she had finished nearly half a pad. The stitching was uneven but held together. When she lifted the leather under the light to inspect it, Samuel walked past, glanced at it briefly, and said quietly, "Sturdy." One word. Not praise, not judgment. Just acknowledgement. Angela felt her chest tighten. Not because of the word or the man who said it, but because for the first time, something she'd done had been named with peace. She bowed her head again, flipped the leather over, and kept sewing. Not to please anyone, not because she'd been told to, just because she wanted to. On the fourth afternoon, as sunlight stretched low across the hardened ground and the breeze carried the scent of old pine resin, Angela heard the sound of wood being dragged behind the workshop. When she turned her head, Samuel was quietly pushing a square wooden crate toward her bed. He set it down and stepped back without a word. She looked inside. Beneath a folded cloth were smoothed wooden pieces, bent metal rods, 2 large new wheels, and several coiled leather straps. Angela looked at him, her eyes shaded with hesitation. "What are you doing?" Samuel didn't answer right away. He knelt by the crate, placing each part carefully on the floor. Then he said, voice calm and even, "Building a wheelchair. Not the hospital kind. This one works on soft dirt. Not done yet, but it'll roll." Angela swallowed hard. Her throat burned, though she wasn't sure why. Why are you doing this for me?" Sam looked up at her, direct, plain. "Because you need to move. And I already had the materials. That's all." The reply was bare, stripped of sentiment, without any frills of generosity. Angela gave a small nod. She didn't say more, but something inside her began to shift. Slow, heavy, like a stone long buried beneath the surface now nudged loose by the wind. 2 days later, when the frame was nearly complete, Samuel rolled the chair beside her bed. He tapped the wooden backrest lightly. "Let's try it now," he said. "Just in the backyard." The ground soft, a little bumpy. "But enough for you to get the feel." Angela stared at the chair like it was something alive. She took a deep breath, gripping the bed frame. Samuel steadied her back and hips, lifting her carefully from the mattress. As she slid into the seat, the wood creaked faintly, but held firm. "Can you push yourself?" he asked. "Let me try." Her hands found the thin metal rims. She pushed gently. The wheels rolled forward a few inches. She stopped, breathing hard, then pushed again. This time she veered left. She corrected. One round, then another. Then she looked over her shoulder at Samuel, panting. "This isn't easy." "No," he said. "But you're doing it." She laughed. Not politely, not to be nice. A real laugh, short and raw, cracked from her chest, the first in years that didn't feel out of place. She turned back and pushed a few more laps across the dirt. Each shove sent pain flaring through her shoulders, but the wheels moved. And with every turn, one thought repeated in her mind, "I'm moving." "Me! No one's dragging me!" "No one's carrying me. Me." After 10 minutes, she stopped and looked up at him. "I don't think I want to leave anymore." Samuel didn't flinch. He just nodded slowly. "You don't have to," he replied, voice low and sure. And nothing else needed to be said. That afternoon, Samuel sat on a wooden chair by the window, holding a piece of white linen. He was mending the sleeve of an old shirt, the kind of task no one imagined a man like him doing so patiently. Angela sat nearby at the table, now comfortable in her wheelchair. She was sorting through a pile of leather scraps he'd given her, organizing them by thickness and color. "What's this for?" she asked evenly. "Handle padding. Could be straps, belts. Depends on who's stitching." She nodded, fingers grazing the pieces as if trying to stir memory through touch. A while later, Samuel set the linen aside and walked to the corner of the room. He pulled open a low drawer and took out a parcel wrapped in old brown paper, tied with a single piece of twine. He untied it, unfolded it, and laid out a long, soft blue dress with frayed edges but sharp creases. Next to it were a light gray cotton blouse and a neatly folded handkerchief. Angela looked at them. "Not sure if it'll fit," he said without looking at her. "But I thought it might do for now. I'll leave it here." He didn't hand it to her. Didn't wait for a thank you. He just said it, then placed the bundle near her feet and turned to fetch the water. Angela looked down at the dress. It had been a long time since she had anything she could call hers. What she wore now was torn and smelled so much like dirt and days that even she hesitated to touch it. But she didn't reach for the new clothes yet, not because she doubted, but because something inside her wasn't quite ready. "Want to wash up?" he asked. "There's a basin and soap. Well water." "I'll bring it in." Angela nodded. So softly her voice barely rose, but Samuel had already gone out. He returned with a basin of clear water, a bar of soap, and a folded cloth. He placed everything on the low table, then turned his back. "I won't look," he said plainly. "No rush. Go at your own pace." Angela adjusted her chair, leaning toward the basin. Her movements were slow, her shoulders tight, wrists aching, but she managed. She washed her face, her neck, her hands. The soap smelled faintly of mint and pine, clean, earthy, and real. No one spoke. Samuel sat with his back turned, flipping through an old notebook. When Angela finally said, "Done," he just nodded, got up, and carried the basin outside. No comments, no reaction. The light dimmed slowly, warm gold slipping in through the doorframe. Angela sat still, her hand resting on the folded dress she hadn't yet put on. She didn't fully understand the feeling in her chest. Something inside was softening, not painful but unfamiliar, like ice thawing from within. As she sat there, Samuel walked over. He didn't sit, just stood beside her, eyes lowered to the floor. "You know," he said quietly, "you're not here because I pity you." Angela looked up. This time he met her eyes, steady and without hesitation. "You're here," he said, "because I want you here." It wasn't an apology. Not a promise, just truth. Angela said nothing. She simply looked at him for a long moment. Then she bowed her head and gently placed her hand on the folded dress. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel like a burden. She felt chosen. Around midday, while Samuel had gone into town to buy lamp oil, Angela sat alone in the workshop, hands organizing small pieces of scrap wood by size. The sky was blue, the breeze light, and the soft metallic clinks from the old horse stall out back echoed gently, where Samuel had left a bin of rusty nails for her to sort. She wasn't nervous about being alone anymore. Not like before. The little house had become familiar. Its silence no longer felt cold. It carried the weight of peace. Then, unexpectedly, came a knock. 2 quick, firm raps. Angela froze. She wasn't expecting anyone. No one ever came. She wheeled herself to the door, but didn't open it. Her voice, steady but low, called out, "Who is it?" A man's voice replied, deep, rough, with a tone that seemed too used to authority. "I'm looking for Samuel Rourke. Heard he's keeping a woman here, someone who shouldn't be living on her own." Angela stiffened. The voice continued after a pause. "Her family's in town. They're concerned. They say she's not well. She shouldn't be living like someone's wife." Each word hit like a dull hammer against her ribs. Angela felt her hands tighten on her wheelchair rims. Not from fear, from something deeper. Anger. A quiet, long-buried anger that now began to rise. She kept her voice calm. "What's her name?" she asked. "Angela Givens." "Then I'm that woman," she said firmly, "and I live here. Not because I'm kept, because I chose to." The man's voice sharpened. "You can't live like this. You don't do anything. You sit all day. You can't walk. You don't get to build a life." Angela didn't answer right away. Her hand dropped to her side, sliding into a storage pocket on her chair. Inside, nestled beside her carving tools, was a small wooden mallet, the one she used to tap joints into place on unfinished chairs. She took it out. Not to raise it, just to hold it. Her voice came out low, firm, clean. "I've tapped every joint in this workshop. I've sorted nails others tossed away. I know who I am, and I know what I'm doing. I don't need anyone's permission to exist." Silence. Then footsteps. Retreating. Not rushed, but clear enough that Angela knew. That door would not open for that man. Minutes later, Samuel returned. He parked the cart outside, arms full of oil and beans. When he stepped in and saw Angela sitting by the door, hand resting lightly on the wooden mallet, eyes sharp and steady, he paused for a second. "Someone came?" "Yes." "What did they want?" "Said they were from my family, but they weren't. Just wanted to drag me back to the place I left behind." Samuel set the sack down. His fists tightened, but his face remained still. "You okay?" Angela nodded softly. "Didn't even need the mallet." "But I didn't open the door." He looked at her for a long second, then nodded. "No one's taking you anywhere." "I wasn't planning to go." And just like that, as if it hadn't happened, Angela rolled back to her table, returning to her work with the small wooden pieces. But something new flickered in her gaze. Not warmth. Edge. She wasn't someone needing protection anymore. She was someone who had learned to protect herself. The days that followed seemed to move more slowly, as if time itself had learned to take its time. No more visitors. No more loud knocks. No more old angers returning. Just 2 people, a wood shop, and small tasks that connected one morning to the next. Angela began waking earlier. She had learned how to roll herself into the backyard without help. Samuel had built a wooden ramp from the back door to the ground, solid, sloped just enough for the wheels to ease down without catching. That morning, as she eased down the ramp, she saw Samuel chopping wood. Sweat dampened his shirt, each swing clean and steady. When he paused to wipe his brow, Angela spoke up. "Let me help carry the logs in." He didn't reply, just nodded. She maneuvered her chair, lifted the small logs one by one into her lap basket. Slow but secure. When she reached the door, he'd already opened it, and didn't take the wood from her hands. She placed them by the stove herself. No words were exchanged. That afternoon, Samuel handed her a thin plank, a handful of small nails, and a short handsaw. "Want to try building the drawer frame?" he asked. Angela looked at the materials, then at him. "I've never done that before." "You're about to." She began to saw. The first cut was crooked, the blade jerked. He didn't correct her, just quietly offered another board. No blame, no instructions. On the third attempt, her line ran straight. For the first time in her life, she used a real tool, and wasn't afraid to break something. That evening, they ate dinner on the porch. Samuel slipped a thin piece of wood under the left wheel of her chair to keep her from rolling downhill. No one mentioned it, but Angela noticed. He always planned ahead. As the sky turned violet, Angela held her bowl in both hands. She looked up at him, her voice quiet but clear. "I'm not just surviving anymore. I'm living." Samuel set his bowl down and looked at her. He said nothing, but his eyes were moist, or maybe it was the wind. Angela continued, "And I don't want to be just a guest in this house." He slowly stood, walked inside. A moment later, he returned with a small wooden box. Inside were a few nails, a curved metal brace, and carved wooden pieces. Angela looked at him. "What's this?" He answered, "Starting a new bed frame. If you want, the back room could be yours. No more sleeping in the workshop." She placed her hand gently on the table's edge. "We'll build it together?" He nodded. "Everything we do now. 2 people." That night, after the lamp burned low, soft tapping echoed from the back room. 2 people, one seated, one standing, fitted each plank into place. No one rushed, no one led. They just worked, like 2 hands learning how to move together. And from that moment forward, Angela was no longer someone being looked after. She was a companion. Autumn began to creep into Wyoming like someone with no reason to hurry. Mornings were cooler, the scent of soil richer, and the leaves behind the horse stall had started turning bronze. Inside the workshop, Angela had moved fully to the second table, one Samuel had built just for her, a bit lower, closer to the window, wide enough for her to maneuver on her own. She stitched armrest cushions, organized drawers, and began practicing cutting small wood pieces to shape. Samuel still handled the core work, chair frames, door handles, stair spindles, but now he no longer worked alone. They didn't talk much. They didn't need to. Their silence wasn't a gap, it was a rhythm, a shared language. One afternoon, when Samuel returned from town, his shirt dusty and arms carrying 2 bundles of old cloth, Angela was wiping down the back door frame. She turned to see him enter. His eyes quickly moved from her face to her waist, then paused at the hand gripping the cloth. "You okay?" he asked. Angela nodded. He set the bundles on the table but didn't turn away. His gaze had softened, not worried, not suspicious. Just light. She knew he'd noticed. The light nausea she felt in the mornings, the way her hand occasionally rested on her stomach. She hadn't planned to hide it. Angela looked at him again, didn't speak, just gave a slow, clear nod. Samuel let out a quiet breath, then smiled. Not broadly, but like wood cracking softly under pressure. He didn't say wonderful. He didn't say ready. He simply walked to the workbench, pulled out an old notebook, and flipped to the last page. "I'll need to add another window to the back room," he said. Angela raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Light, kids need light. And air. That bed back there won't be wide enough." She froze, not from surprise, but from the feeling of being acknowledged. "No, what are we going to do now?" "Zrenia?" Just a truth welcomed, like it had always been meant to be. "I didn't think you were expecting this," she said quietly. "I wasn't," he answered, "but I'm not afraid of it." That night, they sat by the oil lamp. On the table lay 3 small blocks of wood, just the right size for a cradle frame. Angela didn't reach for them immediately. She just watched, then gently placed her palm on the smooth surface. Her eyes didn't well up. There was no dramatic collapse, just a kind of peace she'd never known before. A moment later, she turned to him. "This house, it's not just a shelter anymore." "No," Samuel said. "Now it's ours." She nodded. "And someone else's soon." He didn't answer. He simply reached across and placed his hand over hers. And for the first time, they weren't just holding hands. They were holding something larger than both of them. 3 weeks after the night they began planning the crib, the back room of the workshop looked entirely different. The east wall now had a wide new window. Each morning, Wind drifted through, carrying the scent of pine and the distant sound of hens from a far-off farm. Light poured across the walls, casting soft beams onto a small table and the unfinished crib frame. Angela had taken over assembling the crib slats. She didn't move quickly, but she moved with precision. Samuel cut the wood, she sanded the edges. She stitched the fabric lining, he built the base. Neither of them gave orders. They divided work like they shared space, with rhythm, with instinct. One chilly morning, Samuel was preparing to leave for the sawmill to pick up more pine. Angela sat in the kitchen, wrapping hot cornbread in a cloth. "How long will you be gone this time?" she asked. "Back by noon," he answered, fastening the leather strap of his satchel. "Can I come with you?" Samuel paused, then nodded. "If you want." He didn't ask, "Are you sure?" He knew it wasn't a request to join him. It was a statement of standing beside him. Angela got herself ready. Her wheelchair now had extra cushions she'd sewn, and the armrests had been wrapped in soft leather by him. Samuel laid down planks in the wagon to stabilize her wheels. On the road, as they passed the old field, the one where he'd first seen her lying, both of them fell quiet. Angela looked out at the faint trail where the tent once stood. There was nothing left now but low grass, flat earth, and a worn path cut through. She didn't look away. But she didn't stare either. The past stayed where it was. She had chosen to move forward. That evening, after they returned, Angela carefully stacked the new planks in the back room. Samuel glanced around, then walked to the kitchen and pulled out a small wooden box from beneath a cloth drawer. He opened it. Inside was a thin silver ring, unadorned, unpolished, just a circle of metal, smooth and bright. "There's no preacher," he said, "and no papers waiting." Angela looked at him, her hands still holding a cloth used for polishing wood. "But if you want this to be home," he continued, "then I want you to be mine." She didn't cry. She just set the cloth down and reached out her hand. "I've already stayed," she said. "Now I want to be claimed." He slid the ring onto her finger. He didn't kneel. He didn't lower himself. He stood eye to eye, with nothing but steadiness and quiet truth. Winter came softly. Angela moved into the back room. She still worked in the shop each day. Samuel built her a shelf near the window. One evening, he pushed the bed beside the crib and said, "Have we picked a name yet?" Angela thought for a moment. "If it's a girl, I want to name her Clara, because she'll grow up in light." They both nodded. Outside, snow had just started to fall. Inside, warm lamplight, the sound of crackling wood, the gentle tap of nails, and steady breaths filled the air. There was no wedding, no guests, no big promises. Just a home built by hand, a man who had learned how to wait, and a woman who had once been left behind, now claimed as someone who belonged. Angela hadn't needed to be rescued. She had chosen to rise, and Samuel had simply been the first to be quiet enough not to stand in the way. They say home is where you return. But for Angela, home was the first place she was ever allowed to stay.